Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering whether the chair of the SEC has totally missed the point, basketball's corruption scandal, and what it's like to play cards with the mafia, Facebook's attempt to make Gen Z pine for a time they never experienced, and Florida man sending bomb threats to himself. But first, Tom, how has your week been, and what do you think has been the most interesting development?
Perhaps the best development is we finally had fall arrive in Texas.
Aww.
And we've had 2 nights of 40-degree weather. And that's about all I want. So it's very pleasant, and it can go back now. But cool weather arrived, and that's always nice when that first cold front of the season comes through.
Aww.
I don't know what I'll think in February or January, but right now it's very pleasant.
I'm not a fan of the cold. I live in California on purpose. All right, where do you want to start today?
I want to start with our good friends over at Boeing. And they had a late fee payment issue arrive, and it was around their 777X, I believe that's the name, plane.
Yes.
And we're not here to skewer Boeing again, but it really shows why I think a monitor is needed. The company took a charge and pushed back the delivery of the new 777X to 2027, citing regulatory hangups. When you cite regulatory hangups, what that means is you haven't met your regulatory requirements. And that's exactly what a monitor is designed to help a company with. Now, the Trump administration does not want a monitor for Boeing,
No.
and it proposed no monitor. But you've worked on monitorship cases, and
Twice.
yeah, and so I know you know that one of the reasons to have a monitor is to help a company improve its processes, compliance, safety, whatever the issue is. It doesn't matter. And monitors can be very helpful because you bring in an outside expert with an outsider's view, and it's something the company has to listen to, whether it has to because they've agreed to it by contract, such as the DPA, or the court has ordered it. So I hope the court will take this notice of this, the district court in Dallas, because I still think some type of oversight is needed for Boeing. And even though this is a charge taken for a late fee payment, $5 billion, I think it's significant that Boeing still can't meet the regulatory requirements required.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, they've been having some pretty bad days. To be fair, it has not gone well. And I do take your point. I don't know that it will affect the monitorship decisions, but we shall see. Hopefully they get themselves back in order quickly. I want to begin over here with an article by our friend Matt Kelly of Radical Compliance. It's titled SEC Chair Talks Messaging Enforcement and Misses the Points. Tom, I'm going to be really curious about what you think about this one because I don't have a read on you for this. The person missing the point is Paul Atkins, who is the chairman of the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC's mission is to protect investors and regulate the capital markets. During a speech at a trade organization meeting, Mr. Atkins stated that the previous administration's targeting of off-channel communications was, quote, not the way a regulator should act, unquote. He also said that the SEC will, quote, have to address that, unquote. Okay, so there's likely not going to be more off-channel messaging enforcement, at least in the near future. For those unfamiliar with the term off-channel messaging, think WhatsApp, iMessage, and Signal. Under the Biden administration, the SEC oversaw the prosecution and settlement of scores of financial firms, collectively fining them more than $2.2 billion for these off-channel communications. Now, Matt Kelly is not happy with this pronouncement. His analysis is as followed. He says that this is ultimately a culture issue, and he brought up, for instance, JP Morgan Chase, where the SEC found that managers at every level were using off-channel communications, including with their people who work for them, in blatant violation of the bank's policies and compliance requirements. Basically, if the tone from the top is to ignore at least one compliance mandate, it's not hard to imagine that they will violate others, or that the message is clear that compliance isn't important. Matt then makes the point that orderly markets free from fraud require rules that are followed consistently by everyone. So for now, at least, it's highly unlikely that any off-channel communications will bring harm to financial institutions. We shall see. I have really mixed feelings about this, Tom. I mean, on one hand, I worked on the LIBOR investigation, which we'll talk about later, where thousands and thousands of Bloomberg chats were proof or proving collusion and market manipulations were pretty blatant. But for compliance officers with so many obligations, this trying to monitor people's private devices for encrypted WhatsApp messages seems honestly like a pretty dumb waste of time for things that are typically low-risk conversations. I don't know, I'm kind of tilting toward the SEC chairman's point of view on this, but what do you think?
In a prior life, I was a trial lawyer. And once upon a time, I did litigation involving trading. And what I immediately discovered when I went into that arena was everything was recorded. And all communications with your counterparties, with customers, any phone call was recorded. And I love that. And because it was pretty good evidence of what happened. I recognize you can have off-channel communications and all of those sorts of things, but it certainly took away a lot of guesswork that I had to do. So I have seen and been around that arena. This was the early 90s. So I've been around that arena for 30 years, and I kind of grew up professionally with the fact that traders had to record everything. So I saw the WhatsApp scandal as just an extension of what I experienced 30 years ago, and I see the value in having that record documented. Now, what we didn't have in compliance until maybe 3 to 5 years ago was a way for compliance professionals to, one, scoop that data, and then two, data mine that data to see if anything askance was happening. There are tools that can do that now. And the argument that this is really a different form of communication and it's not possible for us to monitor WhatsApp channels, I completely reject that. There are always tools to monitor. And then but if we put it in the risk management paradigm, if you have a risk, you've identified the risk, off-channel communications, you put together a risk management strategy, whether that strategy is to monitor off-channel communications or how to do that. You train on that, you implement the strategy, you train on the strategy, and you monitor the results. So I really don't see anything different. This is just another form of communications. I do reject the SEC chair's position that the SEC has no business in this. I think they do, and I think it's just an extension of traders. Matt believes this is a compliance failure because there were already rules, policies, and procedures that JP Morgan and others had, and it was being violated literally all the way. Don't go under there and turn off my computer. That were not being followed. So it was a compliance violation already. I see this as a technological problem, that now there's technological solutions. Kind of my first response is, what's the big deal? And the second is, this is no different than it was in 1990 when people had a little hand recorder and they played the tape of the transaction for me. On the one hand, I don't think it's that big a deal. On the other hand, I think Paul Atkins is 100% wrong. And on the third hand, if I could say that, I think there's tools to manage this risk.
Well, we're going to agree to maybe disagree a little bit. All right. What is next up, Tom, for you?
So next up, we have the Financial, right, give me the Action Task Force. So this is an article that comes to us from Bloomberg. It's not current events or breaking news. It's about FATF, or the Financial Action Task Force. And I highlighted this article, Kristy, because I want every compliance professional to be aware of this group. They're a Paris-based group that confronts the challenge of illicit finance. They've been around since the 90s. They put out a reputational, or rather a watch list, that can spur governments into actions as South Africa and Nigeria, who stepped up efforts to combat money laundering and terrorist financing just by putting on the FATF list. They developed the Know Your Customer rules, which is certainly something that everyone would be familiar with. And I want compliance professionals to be aware of this group and to check out their website, because they have a ton of free materials, including policies and procedures and other materials you can use to incorporate directly into your compliance program around financing and AML. And I recognize, so we both came out of non-regulated industries, you in entertainment, myself in energy, and AML was really not at the top of the compliance officer's remit. We had other compliance issues. If you're in a regulated industry and you're in financial industry or banking, financial services, you're maybe much more attuned to AML. It's a long-winded way of saying people who went to the CCO or GC chair and the route we did may not be as familiar with the tools that are available, and FATF has a plethora of tools that are available and a great sort of basic education on illicit financing, and then certainly a deeper dive into what's the sort of cutting edge. So that's the reason I picked this article, and it's really a great resource to start with this organization.
Okay. We'll make sure we put a link to the actual organization itself, because I know the Bloomberg link may not work for everybody, but it was a really interesting article, actually, Tom. I've never heard of this organization, and it reminded me that it kind of reminded me of an underground superhero movie, like this regulator nobody seems to know much about that has real power to change how governments are functioning. I don't know. I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, let's turn to a corruption probe taking place at the giant Oyu Tolgoi, hope I'm saying that right, copper operation in Mongolia. The operation at hand involves the development of one of the world's largest gold and copper deposits. It's in the Mongolian Gobi Desert, about 50 miles north of the Chinese border. This is owned by Rio Tinto. So the company stated it is aware of allegations involving procurement-related activities, whatever that means. So Rio Tinto, which is the giant ore company, is the majority owner of Oyu Tolgoi. It's also the world's second biggest miner by market value, and it's invested billions, with a B, in the underground expansion of this mine. The project has been plagued with delays, cost overruns, and litigation. And in June, Rio Tinto agreed to pay nearly $140 million to resolve a U.S. class action lawsuit alleging the company concealed problems during the underground expansion of this mine. In February, Oyu Tolgoi said that it had faced, quote, false and defamatory allegations, unquote, relating to its procurement process. A short article, Tom. But I was interested in this one because there's a website I found from a company called Good Jobs First that has a violation tracker, because Rio Tinto is definitely a name we've heard of before. Its record scrolls down forever and then has a second page. So this is a tricky one. Also a very tricky part of the world. Mongolia, the Gobi Desert, 50 miles from the border, copper and gold. There's a lot to unpack here, especially in the mining industry. We don't know what's going to happen here yet, obviously, but what's your first take on this, Tom?
Well, my first take is it's Rio Tinto, so we do have to raise an eyebrow. And the second is the Trump administration has said they will evaluate FCPA and probably other white-collar crimes in the context of national security. So could that influence a potential U.S.-based investigation, or at least a U.S. ancillary investigation? And I think it could potentially be very bad, but I don't know if it's going to even, not that it wouldn't hit the radar of this administration, but whether they'll completely ignore it or not.
Well, we shall see. Of course, Rio Tinto is a very large international company, so it's also possible one of the other regulatory bodies, or even maybe like the task force that is Swiss, UK, France, I believe, could go after this one. So stay tuned. It's an early report, but I think one that we may want to look at. Now, this next one is not an early report. It's something we've been following for quite some time here on Two Gurus. Tom, wow, you want to talk about Tesla some more?
Elon Musk has said that he's going to take his ball and go home if you don't play the way I want to play. He said, I'm going to pick up my ball and leave if you don't pay me $1 trillion. Now, that's not $1 million from Dr. Evil. That's $1 trillion. And if I had told you this, you would have looked at me and said, go back to your comic books, Tom. Nobody does this. So how do you have the chutzpah to claim you're worth $1 trillion? Number one, it's Elon Musk. On the other hand, if he has metrics set that value, he can drive value to the point where they could pay him reasonably $1 trillion, why not incentivize him? Go for it. Now, and the reason all of this is public is because it has to be approved by the shareholders. We talked about at length over the past couple of years the litigation in Delaware over his prior pay package where he's paid $65 million as a bonus, having hit certain metrics. Part of me says if he can hit the metrics, let him go for it. But is he really that important to Tesla? And if you have to pay somebody $1 trillion to keep their interest, is that somebody you really want to have hanging around? Now, since we put our articles together, there's of course been additional commentary, and perhaps the most interesting to me was the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has come out publicly and said they have voted against this. And so this is one of the world's biggest, I think number 2 behind the Saudis, Sovereign Wealth Fund. But guess what? They're only $1.6 trillion. And then I looked at that, I thought, oh my God, he wants over half the value of the world's second largest sovereign wealth fund. There's the pig theory.
For one company, for one of his companies.
For one of his companies, said. And how one person could be worth $1 trillion is beyond me, but that's why I'm a solopreneur in Kerrville, Texas, doing podcasts, and he's wants to run Tesla. So I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
I think that the shareholder activism angle of this is really interesting. The article was very much focusing on the chair of the board freaking out that Elon wouldn't be paying attention to Tesla without this giant package. And to give them their absolutely limited due, there were some pretty nutty metrics that they would have to meet in order to actually earn this. And there's 12 different tranches for all of this. But I think it'll be interesting to see what the shareholders do with it. There's obviously quite a battle going on, and we'll find out if he is worth it to them. There we go.
Well, wait a minute. What's your take?
I kind of think that if you make the metrics crazy enough, and they seem to be, that it's appropriate for the shareholders to say yes, because it's a financial decision of the company to decide whether or not this is what is appropriate or not. So I kind of go down the free market on this one to say, if they think he's worth it and he has to hit these crazy goals, I think it said that he has to hit 400 billion or something in sales, and it's currently at 30. The disparate amount of that is so gigantic that I suppose if they think one person's genius is that critical, then that's their right as owners of the company, which is what shareholders are.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right, let's switch gears and talk about the holidays. They're almost here. Believe it or not, I do not believe it. I know it's true, though. And Facebook has noticed. So the snarky article I picked is from Fast Company. And it's titled, Facebook's New Holiday Ad Pines for a Social Platform That's Long Gone. I like the word pines in a holiday world. A holiday word. The article critiques a new Facebook ad called Home for the Holidays. This ad shows friends and family members gathering together after organizing their heartwarming time together on the social media app. I remember 2009, Tom. It was a lovely time. 16 years ago. Anyway, the author points out that there is almost nothing in the current user experience of Facebook that is reminiscent of this watercolored version of the way we were. The article describes the chaos of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, misinformation gone amok, continuing to do that, and recent determinations to let the platform run itself when it comes to what many would call hate speech as opposed to free speech. Facebook is contending with a generational gap, with fewer Gen Zers joining. However, the marketing folks at Facebook say in the article that Gen Z is coming in droves to buy stuff on Facebook Marketplace and to join Facebook dating. Tom, I did not know that was a thing. Savvy listeners of the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast will remember that we highlighted articles earlier this year about Facebook firing its fact checkers and hiring AI content moderators. Just last week, Facebook fired more than 100 people from its privacy and risk team. Perhaps they are home for the holidays now, too, as well. So Tom, I chose this story because it is such a stark contrast of the aspiration the marketers want to paint of a product that, compared to the real world culture issues and customer experience that we have heard much about, including with the whistleblowers there, that frankly, if the if the compliance team were still there in any size, they'd basically be shaking their heads with this contrary series of messages. So I thought that the this article was really important to highlight the difference between what companies want their culture and user experience to be and what it actually is in practice. What do you think this says about either Facebook or about this dilemma that companies face when they have culture issues?
I have a little bit different perspective, and the reason is the following. I live in a county where 38% of the population is over 65. And they are all on Facebook. It is the top advertising, social media advertising platform in my county. And we have a local, essentially live radio show every day on Facebook. And they get 2,000 to 3,000 listeners per show.
Wow.
And it's local news through Facebook. And it started as a Facebook initiative to enhance and embrace local and rural journalism, exactly for people like me. I do have some fondness and can see there's, for that demographic in this county, it is the platform. And so I guess I don't fault Facebook for trying, because I have seen it work in this limited instance. And embracing or trying to embrace something else, I'm not sure when the last time my daughter went on Facebook. And I think I'm not sure they're embracing it, but maybe Facebook dating is, as you say, quote, a thing, end quote.
Okay, yes. And I'm not suggesting that there is no value in Facebook itself. What I'm wondering about more is that what do you do when the public facing messages are so different than how people maybe inside the company, they're firing risk, they're firing privacy, they're firing compliance, they're firing content moderators. I think that is, to me, is the interesting kind of juxtaposition. And for a company that's dealing with, and it's not just Facebook, companies that have perceptions that maybe are quite different in the marketplace and internally than they prefer.
That part, I think all of those firings are going to come around to bite Facebook in its collective rear, except it's not going to be over the issue I raised or even holiday ads. I think it's going to come back in a very big way, Cambridge Analytica or much worse.
We're going to be covering it, I guarantee it. All right, Tom, let's keep going with pop culture, something we don't deal with very often, and talk about basketball and insider betting. Tell me about this.
Sure. This article came to us from Matt Levine, who's the top business columnist in Bloomberg, and frankly, in my opinion, one of the top business columnists in America. He is sourced as well as anyone, but he writes in a great witty style that I just love. And he took a look at the NBA betting scandal, not the mafia part where they were scamming people in the poker games, though he mentioned that. But I focus on his thoughts around the player and head coach and assistant coach who gave out essentially inside information on players' health status or a team's desire to tank to actually lose games to people who then passed that information along to bettors. And he analogized it to inside information. And that was what was really going on here, that people were giving inside information away, and that in itself is not illegal. But the bettors were acting on it. And by acting on it, they were utilizing that inside information to have an unfair advantage. Very similar to inside information in a corporation. And I started thinking, we don't think about information. We think about information as intellectual property. We have intellectual property law. We certainly have data privacy and data protection. And when we think about data privacy, we're typically thinking about personal identifiable information to individuals. Data protection is the corpus of your information in your company being protected so that personally identifiable information is not hacked and taken by nefarious parties. But I'm not sure we think about information as the good, the thing that companies have. And certainly we live in the information era, and people talk about this is the fourth industrial revolution. It's around information. And maybe we need to start thinking about information itself as the operative value of a company. And so I just put that out there because it really spurred me to think about some things in a little bit different way. And if we do need to think about it, then we need to start thinking about what's the risk, how can the information be taken out, how can the information be used, how can the information be leaked out. And so for NBA players, can you tell kind of everyone in your entourage, oh, not feeling too good today, or my ankle's just not where it should be? And corporate, I can't remember, I'm sure you had some training of that in the corporate world, because at Halliburton it was ubiquitous, the insider trading rules. And clearly a certain level of executives that directly applied to, but all the lawyers had to take it, so we were familiar with it. So I had some familiarity with that, and it was something that was well known. We talked about it. We made sure that we didn't violate it, and senior executives had certain periods they could buy or sell. And so I'm very comfortable with that as a legal issue, but maybe we need to think about information in a different way. So I just wanted to highlight that.
I think that was very interesting, although I do find the mafia part at the end definitely my favorite piece. The New York Times did a very long article on that part where people go to mafia-sponsored rigged poker games and then are surprised that they're rigged. I don't really understand that. Why anyone would go to a mob game and think that they are not going to be involved in some nefariousness. That's very peculiar to me, but such is life. Okay, I'm going to turn to an issue that gets me on my soapbox. This article is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled, "CEOs Are Furious About Employees Texting in Meetings." Amen, friends, amen. The article highlights top managers like J.P. Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon, writing to his investors that, quote, "This has to stop. It's disrespectful. It wastes time," unquote. He continued saying, quote, "If you have an iPad in front of me and it looks like you're reading your email or getting notifications, I tell you to close the damn thing," unquote. Well done. The article goes on to describe the pain experienced by people sitting in meetings next to someone texting others, sometimes people even across the table from them in the same meeting. Some employees interviewed for this piece said that they simply have too much work to do in the time allotted and that others expect them to be available constantly, all right, even when they're in with the boss. Some bosses are going as far as to turn off the Wi-Fi or hide passwords at meetings. Others are banning devices and computers except for the person presenting. I agree with that, friends. So I agree, Tom, this makes me crazy. Not as crazy as the people who are clearly working from their computers through a freaking conference, typing while everyone else is there to learn. But crazy regardless. I had a dance teacher when I was in high school, and she used to have us do meditations on the phrase, "be here now." And I use it all the time to remember to be present with whatever I'm doing. But the number of meetings where somebody's got their Teams open and they're half listening and they're half not listening and they're on there. Why are you there? Be here and now, or don't be at the meeting. Close anger. What do you think of this, Tom? This is such a waste of time. I don't get it.
So I hope that you're consuming this podcast on YouTube so you can actually see Kristy rant. This gets under her skin like nothing I have ever seen.
It makes me crazy.
But I want to go back to a word you used very early in your presentation, disrespectful. And I think it was even pre-pandemic. I interviewed a woman who was on several Fortune 100 boards. And I asked her, when you have a board meeting, is everyone present and focused on the board, or are they on their phone? And she said that is, to her, a respect issue. And if you can't respect the place that you are in, you shouldn't be there. And for her, that meant to be on a board. But it was all about respect. And she said, you have to respect the meeting. If you don't respect the meeting, you shouldn't be there, which is basically what you just said. But she was talking about it at a board meeting, that she doesn't want her fellow board members playing on their phones. Now, the era of iPads for board meetings has become, I think, fairly standard now, where you have your board packet on an iPad. But you don't have to enable the Wi-Fi.
Turn on your email application or your Teams to have the
Right.
board deck up. Let's be honest.
But, having the internet turned off in a conference room, it's pretty rad. Although there's a school in my county where they do that exactly in the conference room / cafeteria, and they turn off the Wi-Fi. And if you show up to make a presentation and you're planning to get it on the cloud, SOL. So maybe it's a strategy. But tell us the story again about the speaker panel.
Oh, yeah, I'll just never forget it. That 2 different times this past year, I have been a moderator on a panel where the speakers responded to text messages in real time as a panelist when they weren't speaking. They just opened up their phone and started to respond. And I genuinely didn't know what to do. And one of the guys wrote about this in a blog article. And one of the comments on it was a person saying that she doesn't think she could have held her tongue. And she'd have looked at the panelists and be like, I'm sorry, is there somewhere else you need to be right now? Is there an emergency for you to be answering this? I really struggled with whether to say anything or just to let it go. I chose to let it go, but wow. I don't know. Tom, would you have said something? What would you have done?
Here's exactly, I would say something, and here would be the response. I'm sorry. I just got a text. My father died. I have to leave. And that would be that. So, yeah.
There we are. All right. You want to talk about LIBOR? All right. Bring it up. What's happening?
Yeah, I was introduced to LIBOR in the first decade of this year. I thought it was one of the great tools for a commercial lawyer because it gave us the ability to set a standard literally across the world. We had a rate. Everyone knew what it was. You could check it daily. I could do a contract in Singapore. I could do a contract in Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, you name the country, you name the city, Dubai, etc. And of course, the LIBOR scandal happened, and I was appalled by that. And Tom Hayes was the face of that. He was this brilliant trader from UBS and I think JP Morgan. And he, for reasons he will articulate or has articulated, became the face of the scandal. He was convicted. He had his conviction overturned. Now, he didn't have his conviction overturned for not being a part of the scandal. It was really on technical grounds. Nevertheless, the UK Supreme Court threw out his conviction and he's now a free man. He has now sued UBS, saying that everything he did while there was approved by his supervisors. He's got evidence of that, and that he was made the fall guy by UBS, and their internal investigation was designed to show him as the person. I'm going to leave it to you to maybe talk about that part of it, but what I want to, and I selected this article because we've had several cases now where the internal investigation has been attacked. And I'm moving towards a soapbox that if you have a serious matter, you need a serious internal investigation by a serious law firm with white-collar lawyer experts who know how to do an internal investigation. And I won't get into those other cases now because we're talking about LIBOR, but if it turns out that's correct, he sued for $400 million, and he sued in U.S. court. So my sense is that there must be something there for him to bring this suit because he's subjecting himself to some pretty serious potential sanctions if it's not true. But I just want to be on a high horse to say, if you got a serious matter, hire a serious law firm for a serious internal investigation. But you may have some other thoughts.
I don't, because I actually was on that serious law firm investigation. I was in Switzerland and London investigating Tom Hayes on UBS's legal team when I was at Gibson Dunn. So I am so steeped in this that it's amazing. I will say thank you for it because I lived in London for this investigation and met Jonathan while I was there. So my husband ended up in London for 9 years. So it was a pretty amazing experience to do that. And the LIBOR investigation was absolutely fascinating. LIBOR, of course, has now gone away as a global benchmark. But it's an interesting problem of when you're having, essentially LIBOR itself was having competitors trying to work together to find a rate that was appropriate at that time. So in and of itself, it's a bit like being at trade organizations and having competitors talking about what's going on in the market and trying to make sure you don't cross the line into anti-competitive behavior, which isn't always clear. I will be very interested in seeing what happens with this case. And If it would go to trial, what would come out? I will be following it, but not commenting, because I'm pretty sure that I still have all kinds of privilege issues in talking about it. So there we are. Where I don't have privilege issues, Tom, Florida. I do not have privilege issues in Florida. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be privileged enough to go to the state anymore after all I've been talking about them. This time our Florida man is 20-year-old Kyle McHenry. Sometimes we all feel bad about ourselves, but on this day, Mr. McHenry felt downright self-loathing. He was so mad at himself that he inexplicably wrote threatening emails to himself, pretending to be somewhere else or someone else. So he menaced that, quote, "There's a bomb on your grandpa's property," unquote. Not sure why he was threatening his own grandpa. Quote, "I'm going to break into your house and shoot you in the effing head. And my personal favorite, I'm going to kill you. Watch me." Which makes me wonder. So he's going to kill himself, but challenge himself to watch. Mirror, I'm not sure. Anyway, Mr. McHenry called the police, demanding to know why they hadn't arrested the person who had sent the emails. Police, noticing some seriously suspicious email addresses, asked if Mr. McHenry sent them to himself. He fessed up, saying he posed as the other person to get revenge on them. Mr. McHenry was charged with making false reports to police, fraud, and peculiarly misuse of false evidence, which made me wonder, is there proper use of false evidence? I don't know, as opposed to the misuse of false evidence. Is that a thing? Mr. McHenry told detectives that he had made a mistake. So the moral of the story is, if you're going to threaten someone with bombs, don't make it yourself. That kind of thing only blows up in your face and is explosively stupid.
Kristy, I'd like to end by maybe both of us saying a few words about our good friend Adam Turtletop. You want to start?
Sure. I will never forget the time that I met that very tall man. I had just joined the compliance profession and was sent to the SCCE's conference in London, where I knew no one because I'd become an in-house practitioner 2 months previously. We'd become friends there and become friends for years and years on end. I think probably known him for about 13 years. And his ability to navigate the profession and care about it so much has been profound. And I think that he'll definitely be missed at the SCCE. What do you think, Tom?
I think he will definitely be missed, but I have 3 things about Adam that I wanted to highlight. Number one is in 2017, we had a bet on who would win the World Series. He, of course, lost, which meant he had to wear a Houston Astros t-shirt, and I took a picture of it. He later claimed that it was fraud that allowed the Astros to win.
Deep fake.
Deep fake. So that was, he still occasionally will raise that to me, only when we speak or communicate. The second thing is, I was in Cuba once, back when you could go to Cuba, and they had us all in a westernized hotel, and I come out of the elevator, and I'm following this very tall man with a bald spot in the back of his head, and I went, there's only one person I know who looks like that, and that's Adam Turtletop. And it turns out it was Adam Turtletop, and he was on a UCLA tour. His wife is a provost, I think, at UCLA. I got to see Adam in Havana, and I think we shared a cigar at the hotel. The third is, I met Adam around 2010, 2011, maybe a little bit earlier, sometime around there. But at that point, he was doing training all over the world for SCCE. But he worked at home in Los Angeles. He's a LA boy. He was one of the first people I met who had a career working at home. And I was impressed. He worked insane hours because he was traveling internationally. And he said, yeah, that's right, but I'm at home when I'm in America. And I'm home with the girls, with his daughters. And I thought, what a brilliant way to work. And he was one of the first people I know who was able to do that. So that was probably something, some him and some SCCE, but I thought it was a great way to use a talented person like him. I think we're all going to miss him, and he was a great part of SCCE for 17 years, I think.
Thank you, Adam, for your contribution to the organization and to the profession. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.